Good day, everyone. Morning, afternoon, evening, night, whenever you're watching us. Um, this week, it's going to be our first week in 2025 Season 1. And luckily, we're at a track that is some high temperatures. So, we can thank iRacing for this. We're going to have a lot hotter track temp than we've been accustomed to in this small little week um, leading up to this season. So, thankfully, we have some track that takes some discipline, some methodical thinking, technique, all the above to look at and tackle the track with. So, I'm going to dive into how you need to navigate this track, how you need to navigate rolling off the throttle, transition into your brake. And yes, we're using brake this week, so that's another avenue that is going to be something that we haven't been accustomed to in quite a few weeks. So, as you see on the screen here, our race option for me this week will most likely be looser. I think you're going to have probably about a 10 to 15 degree split as far as your track temp goes, anywhere from 100, maybe 105, all the way up to 120. So just really contingent on the skybox that you have, whether it's going to be mostly cloudy, partly cloudy, something like that. So I think you're going to have one of kind of each style, skybox. So I'm going to let this start with, a lap or two running by itself, kind of give some correlation of what's happening. And then also another point of how I'm kind of attacking the track with my mindset and what I'm looking for. So it's a hard track to really look at markers here because like you're really relying on trying to widen these entries as much as you can, but also not break the car free on entry. So with that said, I'm going to work on letting this play for a lap or two here, and we'll debrief after. All right, so that's 2 laps on Iowa Speedway and Xfinity car. So with this track guide, we're going to dive into the importance of shaping off the wall, when to decelerate, time and how to decelerate to keep the balance neutral or having enough stability on entry to get into your braking phase. And it is very key at this track to recognize how you need to get your entry stability matched with speed and also matched with the correct angle you need to carry into the corner. So before I dive into turn one here, on the replay itself and the visuals, I'm going to debrief on how I'm thinking as a driver what I need to do. So when I'm decelerating, I think you guys seen a couple laps, obviously, how I'm getting off the throttle and not just instantly shaping even more wheel input into it just to shape more wheel input into it. So turn one is really important on how to figure out to navigate. And to do that the correct way is obviously a balance to where you as a driver need to get a feel for the car. So if you feel like you're running into these bumps into turn one up here too aggressively and feeling the splitter hit too often, then and getting offline too much, 9 times out of 10, that is because of how much speed you're carrying into that initial, area of hitting the splitter. So if you don't have all that response in the wheel, it's because you're hitting the splitter at too fast of a point that it's hitting, and you're not allowing it to recover, meaning the car dynamically is not recovering at the rate that it can because of how much speed you're carrying. So this track with the mindset, how I approach it is you have to think dynamically what the car is doing, realize what you're doing, increasing the rate of throttle percentage, as a area to kind of discuss. If you're carrying too much throttle in a phase, you Obviously, for exits, you might be lifting the splitter up. So if you're carrying too much, maybe you just need to lessen that throttle percentage to keep a similar balance to then get to the exit how you want to. So we talk about this at length sometimes, how you need to get your entries shaped because every exit has an entry point on a racetrack. Let's think about that. You know, as cliche as it is, every corner exit, you have a corner entry to get to that corner exit. So I'm going to slow this up on our phase into the corner. There's obviously not a lot of markers we can look at here, okay? Obviously not a lot of markers to rely on. So an area that is very difficult to pinpoint is you want to maximize your angle near the wall, just like we want to do everywhere. You want to get as close to the wall before you turn away from it at a lot of these racetracks. So you have all the capability to carry as much entry momentum, meaning as much speed as you can into turn 1 and turn 3. And again, stability is very key at this racetrack. You need to have entry stability just so you can actually create the momentum into your rolling phase at both corners. And that's leading into the center of both corners. So again, if you're charging too much speed, crossing these seams down into the yellow line, and you can't keep the car stable enough, we have to work on how to, finite how we can actually shape it to the corner with the correct steering angle, braking, throttle, and everything. So back into our transition of turning away from the wall, which meaning is our corner approach and then approach away from the wall. We're actually just keeping the car neutral. You can see here, pretty straight. And then our deceleration rate is very important. You're going to see how I'm decelerating with some wheel back to the left just a little bit, and then not just instantly dumping the throttle. Play this at full speed. Now it's a slow decel, right, from 100% to 0. But again, it's difficult because you're trying to balance this car dynamically on entry. So if you're stabbing the brake initially all the way from like 0 to, let's say, 50% brake, you're changing that car's platform dynamically. You're changing where the front's obviously compressing down to the track, so you have more prone capabilities of the splitter hitting, but also the rear is dynamically popping up because we're shifting the balance of the car. So in that same moment, you want to make sure you're not using too much wheel input. Make sure you're actually able to cross these seams with some connectivity in the front, and which is very important to keep this car balanced. If you're having to go like as you guys would see, like a zigzag, constantly with the brake pedal from 15%, 50%, 40%, 20%, and then back up to 50%, you're not keeping that balance as consistent as you can because you're changing it so aggressively with the percentage of brake you're using. So if you can modulate this brake pedal to be as smooth as you can without having to shift with too much speed on entry and then adding too much brake with too much wheel angle, you're going to keep a connected balance on entry. And it's very important to recognize that. In this video, we're going to really dive into our entry here and how important it is that'll help our center. And I'll show you guys later on, lap 15, 30, and 40 to show you guys have a representation of how much fall off we have. But how important it is it shifts because your lift point's going to actually, happen sooner. You're going to change the way you're actually balancing that throttle to help keep the balance in the car. So as you can see here, pretty minimal brake. I'm having a little bit increase, decrease. And once we get into this compression zone after we cross this second seam, again, it's not a big marker for you guys to see, but if you can use when you're crossing the seam before you see a dark patch here to the lighter patch, you're going to see you're going to really compress into the bumps. And then this is the area to really think ahead. Think ahead to where we get to this pit exit cone here. So at this phase, I'm already thinking, okay, I know how the car's feeling. I know how it's really reacting with this, braking input I have and steering angle. So if I'm actually getting to where I need to get this car pointed to the yellow line at this same trajectory that I have, I need to recognize if I use more brake, I don't want to add more wheel input because what that's going to do it's going to actually induce a little bit more slip to the left front and right front, taking some grip potential away to the front. And then also at that same point, when I release that brake and I have all that steering angle, I may have that quality of transitioning aggressively and creating a snap into the car, meaning I'm going to actually break the rear free because of how on edge entry is, and at that moment of just making the car tighter with the front grip being lacked. Now, very important again to keep stability through these bumps, and you'll notice this Iowa turn 1 sign up here on the wall. Let's slow this up a little bit. You can see I'm using less brake. I open the wheel up, I use more brake. I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping it in that window of stabilized entry. Now, rolling phase is very important here. I'll show you guys chase view on this lap just so you guys have a perspective, but it's very key to just walk through this. The more shaping I am, like right here where you see on the track, this is exactly where the front clip of the car, the splitter, is meeting the O in the Iowa turn 1 sign in the turn 1 on the wall. Now you can see how much brake I have, and you can see how little input I have to the left. That's, again, to keep the car connected. Now, the car's going to change a lot dynamically. You're going to run through some bumps. Sometimes you may hit the left edge of the splitter, the right edge of the splitter, and feel like you're going to go up the track half a tire width, or whatever. Sometimes we just got to understand it's because of all the entry speed we're carrying. Once again, now watch this next phase where I get to my rolling phase right near pit exit. And that is just to make sure I'm actually carrying the potential of the front all the way to this pit exit box. Because my thought is, just to lay this out, by the time I hit that entry phase I talked to you about, I'm already thinking ahead to this box. I'm trying to keep that potential in the front to where I know I need this front potential in the grip to point me to this pit exit box. And that's to make sure I get as much grip to this left front as possible. But once again, very difficult because it is a really bumpy section in this phase. And you're going to, as soon as you want to get to the throttle, you're going to have the car really bounce up. And it's because of how really steep that bump is in one. Like, you're actually cresting that bump and then recovering. So the car is actually losing a lot of downforce in that phase because it's just the nature of this track. And through here, it's very key to recognize you need to get to a rolling phase. Again, off the brake, off the throttle. So you can have that balance in the front pointing all the way to where you start these billboards. And once you cross that box and get to the first set of the billboards on, before the Coca-Cola sign over here, you want to be in partial throttle so you can create the front potential and the rear connected together. So if you do that, you're going to add more steering angle, obviously, because you're raising the splitter, obviously. You're not going to have as much downforce. And if you use too much throttle with all this wheel input, you're just going to spin this car out at this moment, okay? So thinking that in mind, now is where you have to navigate the on-throttle side I was talking about earlier. Is how can you, as a driver, make sure you're not having to get out of the throttle and get all the drive off that you need, because as we said, every corner exit has a corner entry, and now we shaped our entry how we needed to. How we needed to get to our rolling phase, how we got the front gripping all the way to this painted line, and now we're still at the center point of the corner. Now we're in a partial throttle phase to where now we're regaining that momentum back, regaining that lap time, making lap time because we're in the throttle. And we're not heavy in the throttle initially because we're crossing these bumps. And you can see how offline, right in this phase, you're going to see how aggressive this car really bounces up. You can see how much the left front just goes up. And we're just trying to hug this line. And we're obviously on sticker tires. So to give you guys another area for a marker on the exit of the corner, to get to our 100% throttle moment, it's going to be around the Miller Lite billboard on turn 2 exit. This is on cold tires, okay? Remind yourself of that. Cold tires, pressures are just starting to come up to temperature a little bit. So this is turn 2. Again, Miller Lite, turn 2, exit. You're going to notice that just above the wall at the fence, you're going to see that billboard. And that's the area you want to get back to your 100% throttle moment. Now, if you're doing that a lot earlier, you're going to get a push in this car and become offline because this car lacks a lot of lateral grip that you need because of all the steering angle you're trying to open up for exit. You can see how much you're cresting some bumps, and the bumps will upset you. And then now you got a seam to worry about. The seam is very important to dissect in crossing with not too much throttle sometimes later into a run, but also not too much wheel angle, shaping the right front crossing it and then the right rear crossing it as well. So let's play this at slow speed. And you can see I have a little bit of cross that I'm having to counter steer a little bit, and that's because I got to the throttle heavy. But in that same approach, I was a little aggressive and not managing my mid exit how I should have. Lower. I opened the wheel up too early, and then decided I needed to use more wheel input. So I created a small push loose in that condition, brake and rear traction. So just something to realize in that scenario. Now turn 3, I think, is a very unique corner. It is very important how you're balancing the car even more into turn 3 because of how aggressive you can and how tight of a radius it is earlier than turn 1. Turn 1, you have a more flowing arc than you would have turn 3. And we're going to slow this at half speed. Much like turn 1, though, you're looking to shape the corner, turning the wheel a little bit so you actually get the front connected earlier, get the potential of the front earlier. And now you can see I'm a small at this phase, and like I'm already starting my lifting process. So with that in mind, this is even more of an important factor in this section of the track, is how you're carrying part throttle through here, because there's some adequate ways to attack this corner. You can lift earlier, you can lift fully later though, but you can lift earlier and then keep the balance which you need to get the front pointed down crossing this first seam. And it's really tricky because you're trying to balance this car with as little brake pressure that you can to keep the front connected, and then timing when you need to get off this brake when you're crossing near these dash lines. You can see here I'm crossing this first seam, crossing this next seam, and as soon as I cross it, I know the whole rear of the car is now past it. But I still have to keep some balance to the front. I don't want to overdrive the corner and then just use too much brake to break the rear traction and make it more free. So I'm trying to keep this car neutral, trying to keep it progressively turn into the center and wrapping this center on the bottom, much like I would in turns 1 and 2. But the entry phase really dictates your potential in 3 and 4, because you're trying to figure out how much speed can you lose. And a lot of guys will overcharge turn 3, get their center so bound up tight to where they have to use so much wheel input, and then when they have so much wheel input, they have to get to the throttle so aggressively because they lost all that time. Well, what you're doing in that moment is you're creating a push loose condition, and that's just not adequate. Frankly, it's just not adequate to do because you're pushing the right front off of it, and then you're putting the right rear really dominant at that phase where you just don't have no potential to use. So very important to not use too much brake. And if you're using, I'm gonna back this up a little bit once again. If you're using all this brake potential, like let's say your max pressure is 15 for me right here. If you're using all that at this phase, when you're crossing, I'll slow this back up again. When you're crossing the Iowa 3 sign, then what you're doing is, again, you're bodying the car up, and then also you're putting it more prone to slide with that much pressure, depending on your wheel angle. You got to keep it connected. You got to keep the front potential connected to the rear and not have the rear too dominant at one moment, especially when you're compressing into 3. So as far as your throttle phase, you really want to have a little bit of a rolling phase. You're probably going to have about 50 foot of rolling phase where you're off the brake and throttle. And then partial throttle is really key in getting to. You can see how I have my initial throttle. It's about 60% I get to. And I'm keeping it there. I'm keeping the front turning at a similar consistent rate, not too much wheel angle. The more throttle I put, the more I'm opening the wheel up. Okay? Recognize that. And if you use too much, you can see exactly what happened here. I'm at a pretty limitation of rear potential because I got the rear skewed too much. Now I got to use a little bit less throttle, or I have to just balance this car out with staying this throttle partly, and then letting the car balance out with the, turning back to the left. And look at this. Look how much I'm just moving it. These seams are pretty aggressive to where you got to make some momentum, and those seams will take some momentum away because of how aggressive you have to be to the part throttle. Now, recognizing that is easy. You could just delay your 100% throttle moment instead of going to it like I did, exit a little bit lower, maybe even aim to get off this paint. Really, I would say 1 hash mark before the paint ends, and try to exit as straight as you can. But that's going to change when you're racing. When you're racing side by side, you're going to get pitched off a little bit. So one thing I want to show you is I'm going to go to lap 20, and then I'm going to go to lap 40. I'm going to show a chase view of lap 20, and we're going to recognize some of our differences, just what the car is doing on entry. And this turn-in phase, again, once again, is very important. Just get the car stable enough. We talked about how going consistently to 0% throttle, and it's going to change around, about 25 to 30, I would say, is how you can change your approach, keeping some stability on entry with some partial throttle before you actually fully get off of it. Now, slow this down a little bit. Initial brake, trying to get the car balanced, pretty bumpy. I brake the car a little bit free. Brake it a little bit free here from too much brake, and then I'm having to use a little bit less brake to kind of balance that car back out, straighten the car up, and then work towards getting into this compression zone once again to really flow my entry. Now, I'm going to have a little bit more of a rolling phase because adequate, responses, let the car work, let the front end work, and then really try to keep the car connected. And it's harder once the tires get more temperature in there. If you see, at this phase, we pretty much lost a second of lap time from lap 1 to 20. So you're going to have a little bit more of an area you really got to focus towards in getting our adequate lap time, getting our tires connected together, and really putting everything together and keeping yourself driving the racetrack. Not overdriving entry, not overdriving center, and then making sure you can actually make lap time with straightening into your exit for straight drive off. So I'm going to let this place full speed so you can see how much the car moves over these bumps in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You can see how I just need to get this car balanced, go through a rolling phase and then partial throttle, and try to power off the corner as straight as possible. Use some of the banking on exit as much as you can, and that's what we really need to do. Keep the car balanced, crossing those seams. Back this up a little bit for you. Crossing these seams, if you're pretty loose here, crossing the seam, you can see how much I'm breaking traction. As soon as the right rear crosses the seam a little bit more, where I have to catch the car a little bit, and that's getting off the brake, catching it, and then I'm keeping it within that window, obviously, of how loose the car is. You don't want to be that free on entry, but just something to kind of combat is just getting off the brake a little bit, making sure you're not having to correct 20 to 30 degrees on entry, and then just keeping the car stable enough at speed to keep it turning down to this box, like I mentioned before. You really want to make sure this car turns at this box. Just before it is okay, but you really want to make sure it's turning, and you got the front connected for grip wise to stay pointed down to this yellow line, as that's just the area you're getting ready to go to part throttle. Now let's go to lap 40, and this is going to be on the higher side of both corners. This is higher side in 1 and 2, so we're going to be running the middle lane in 1 and 2, and the top side in 3 and 4. And you can see how our entries are going to be different. So I'm going to let this play at full speed and then talk about it. It's a pretty good lap 40, I would say, to be frank with you guys, on the potential of 3 and 4. 1 and 2, I could have cleaned up a little bit on the stability of it, but you can tell I have a pretty consistent rate on how I like to get the balance, and that's just having a low crossover point of partial brake and then rolling out of the gas completely, which would probably be about 15% to 10% crossover point of where that matches up, in telemetry, 10% brake and 10% throttle, just so you guys know, and I'm still keeping some potential of the front. If you want to eliminate that, you can completely eliminate it by getting off the brake or getting off the gas fully and then getting to your initial braking trend. You can tell here, outside car perspective, keeping the car neutral as I can, crossing this top seam. And then this phase, if you're running in the middle, is very important not to just drive into these bumps. It's hard to see the bumps. You have to understand where they are in the track by just feel and recognizing where they are based on feel and what your angle into the corner is when crossing these seams. Now, running on the top side, you're going to run into some bumps too once you get exactly near this dashed mark. And you're going to be running up there because you really want to focus on your corner exit momentum. And that's where momentum happens at this track, is in middle lane and the top lane. But here, running this middle seam, very important because you're actually going to get off the brake a lot earlier. And really try to keep the front just in a rolling phase where you're not taking too much speed away. You can see how long of a rolling phase I am compared to the bottom lane, and I still have the same area, and I'll switch it momentarily, where I'm getting back to the partial throttle. Because now I can actually get the car turning with a little bit more banking, less bumps to work through into the center of the corner, to where the car's just not changing as much dynamically. Now, partial throttle before these billboards, and you can see trying to keep partial throttle, wrapping this seam. Once I get off that seam, obviously you got to create momentum. You're timing where that 100% throttle moment is, and we're gonna carry a little bit of a free condition the closer we get to the wall, because of the rear of the car, the tires are hot, and then they're just lacking some lateral grip and potential because of wearing through the tires, and they're just pretty hot. Now, going into turn 3, much different on the top side once again, and how we're just getting a lot of potential on entry. We're carrying a lot more speed, a little bit less brake, and rolling off the brake more. And we're going to be out of the brake quite early, and then we're going to be back to partial throttle earlier because we're using this banking on the top and seam to use our line and reference point to wrap. So trying to create all that momentum without pinching the center too much, taking so much speed away on the bottom side of the track compared to the top side. And if you're running the top early on, you're going to be torching the tires really quick, and you're not just going to be torching the right front, you're going to be torching the rear of the car, and being too dominant and breaking free too early. So something to just look on, think about, and those are just kind of my feedback on what we should be looking for this week, what I struggle to deal with at this track, and how do I actively navigate towards it. So once again, just something to look into. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I know it's another long video. I think it's very worthwhile to just sit here and talk for 20 to 30 minutes so you guys can really understand what I'm going through when I attack these tracks, what obviously a pro on iRacing is thinking, when he's trying to attack corner entry, center, and exit at a bumpy track nonetheless, but also a car that does not make a lot of downforce in general. So this week should be a lot of fun for us. We should have a couple options in keeping the car pretty neutral, maybe a looser option that might be better for some folks early on in a run, may take away a lot of grip at the end of the run, but we also may have a tighter option that has a lot more drive off to where you can just focus on that side and making sure you're not overshooting entry to maximize your lap time for your on throttle side of the lap. So but that'll do it for this video. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I want to welcome a lot of guys for our 2025 season 1, and we're gonna have a good week this week. Appreciate all you guys tuning in, and I'll see you guys for the next one.